10 years ago, an orphan omega fed a starving alpha with his last bowl of rice. That night, the alpha held his shaking hands and whispered a promise he had no right to make. "Wait for me. I'll come back rich, and I'll marry you." The omega believed him. Years passed. Poverty stayed. Hope almost died. Until, one day, black luxury cars filled the orphanage yard, and the alpha who once slept hungry on the floor returned, powerful, ruthless, and wealthy, only to discover the omega had already learned how to survive without him. But alphas don't forget promises, and they don't let go of what they've claimed. The first time I saw him, I thought he was already dead. He lay half-curled beside the abandoned fence behind the orphanage, skin pale beneath layers of dirt and dried blood, breath coming so shallow I had to kneel just to be sure it was there at all. Night rain soaked through my thin shoes as I hovered over him, heart pounding so loud I was afraid it would wake the other children sleeping inside. He was an alpha. I knew it instantly. Even broken and starving, the scent clung to him. Faint, wild, like iron and smoke. Dangerous, the kind we were warned about. The kind an orphan omega like me was supposed to avoid at all costs. But his hands were shaking. Not with rage, not with dominance. With hunger. I swallowed hard, fingers curling around the small cloth bundle pressed to my chest. Inside, it was my dinner, half a bowl of rice I'd saved from lunch, wrapped carefully so it wouldn't spill. It was all I had until tomorrow, maybe longer, if the kitchen supervisor decided we hadn't earned another meal. I looked at him again, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused, glassy. For a moment, they locked onto mine, sharp despite the pain. And I flinched. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I knelt. I won't hurt you, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or to myself. You look like you need this more than I do. He tried to sit up. Failed. A broken sound tore from his throat, teeth clenching as his body gave out beneath him. That was it. I unwrapped the cloth and brought the rice to his lips with trembling hands. Slowly, I said, "Please." His pride fought first. I could see it, the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers twitched, as if he wanted to grab the bowl himself. But hunger won. He ate like someone who had forgotten what food felt like. Not greedy, not wild, just desperate. Like each mouthful was a promise his body didn't quite believe. I watched him the entire time, breath shallow, head racing, waiting for that moment he'd snap and remember he was an alpha and I was nothing. It never came. When he finished, he sagged back against the fence, eyes closing, shoulders shaking with exhaustion. I hesitated, then reached out and pulled my old scarf from my neck, draping it over him to keep out the cold. "Thank you," he murmured, voice rough, barely there. I startled. "You're welcome." That should have been the end of it. One act of kindness. One night. But the next evening, he was there again. Worse. His lip was split, one eye swollen shut. He smelled faintly of blood that wasn't his. I didn't ask what happened. Alphas who looked like that didn't come from gentle places. I brought food again and again. Every night for weeks I snuck behind the orphanage after lights out, hard hammering as I carried scraps and rice and Sometimes, if I was lucky, a piece of bread. I sat beside him as he ate, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the soft breathing of a city that didn't care whether we lived or died. He never touched me, never growled, never scented me, just talked. His name, he said, was Kale. He didn't tell me his family name, didn't need to. The way he spoke of where he came from, violence, debts, fists instead of words, I understood why he'd run. My life was decided the day I was born, he said once, staring up at the dark sky. I didn't like the ending they chose for me. I hugged my knees to my chest. I didn't get to choose anything at all. He turned then, really looked at me, at my too-thin arms, my worn clothes, the omega suppressant patch hidden under my collar. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. I smiled, small and tired. Neither should you. Something changed after that. He started waiting for me. I could feel his relief when I appeared, see the way his shoulders eased. Some nights, when the pain got too bad, I let him lean against me. His head was heavy on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. I should have been terrified. I wasn't. One night, rain pouring down in sheets, he caught my wrist as I stood to leave. Don't, he said. Just stay a little. I hesitated. Curfew meant punishment. Hunger, sometimes worse. But I stayed. His fingers were rough, calloused, warm. They tightened slightly, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. I don't know how long I can keep running, he said, voice low. But one day, I won't be like this. I tilted my head. Like what? Poor? Powerless? His jaw clenched, hungry. The rain softened his edges, turned the fierce alpha into just a boy bruised by the world. When I get rich, he said suddenly, looking straight at me, eyes burning with something fierce and unshakable, I'll come back for you. I blinked. Come back? He squeezed my hand. I'll marry you. The words hit me like lightning. An alpha. Rich. Marriage. It was ridiculous. Impossible. The kind of lie children told themselves to survive another day. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You don't even know my name. Tell me. I hesitated, then whispered it. He repeated it like a vow. I swear, Kale said, voice steady despite the storm. I won't forget you. Wait for me. I should have known better. But I nodded anyway. The next night, he was gone. No blood, no body, just the empty fence and the echo of a promise I was foolish enough to believe. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the rain and didn't feel his presence. Kale was always there before me. Even on nights when he could barely stand, he'd drag himself back to the fence, leaning against the wood like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I'd see his silhouette first. Broad shoulders, messy hair, the quiet patience in the way he waited, never calling my name, never rushing me. That night, there was nothing. The space beside the fence was empty. No familiar alpha scent clinging to the damp air. No soft sound of breathing. Just rain, heavy and cold, soaking into the ground where he should have been. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, telling myself he was late, telling myself I was overreacting. He had bruises that took days to fade, cuts that reopened too easily. Maybe he was resting. Maybe he'd found somewhere safer to hide. I waited. Minutes stretched until my fingers went numb around the small bundle of food I'd brought. The rice inside had already cooled, steam long gone, but I didn't move. I couldn't. "Kale?" I whispered finally, hating how small my voice sounded in the dark. No answer. I crouched beside the fence, scanning the shadows, my pulse climbing with every second. The rain soaked through my clothes, plastering fabric to skin, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was the way he'd looked at me the night before. Intense, burning, like he was trying to carve my face into his memory. "Wait for me." The words echoed in my head, sharp and insistent. I searched the area with frantic eyes. There were signs of a struggle. Mud churned up, a broken bottle near the alley, dark stains on the ground that the rain hadn't quite washed away yet. Blood. My breath hitched painfully. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I dropped the food and followed the stains, heart racing, every step heavier than the last. They led a short distance away from the fence, and then stopped. Just stopped. No body, no sign of where he'd gone. I stood there shaking, rain mixing with something hot on my cheeks, staring at the empty ground like it might suddenly give him back to me if I looked hard enough. He was an alpha, strong, fierce, too stubborn to die easily. That was what I told myself as I stumbled back inside the orphanage long after curfew, too numb to care about the punishment waiting for me. It came anyway. I was locked out of dinner the next day, forced to scrub floors until my hands cracked and bled, told I was lazy, useless, just another omega mouth that didn't deserve to be fed. I didn't argue. Every night after that, I went back to the fence. At first, I told myself it was just in case he returned late. Then, it became routine, a habit I couldn't break. I brought food every night, even when it meant stealing scraps or going hungry myself. The food always came back untouched. Days passed, then weeks. The rain turned colder. The nights grew longer, and still, there was no sign of him. People came and went through the city. Alphas with power and money, betas with purpose, omegas with families who came to visit them, holding hands, bringing warm meals and soft smiles. I watched them all with a hollow ache in my chest. Sometimes, late at night, I thought I smelled him, a phantom trace of smoke and iron in the air. I'd sit up in bed, heart racing, convinced he was calling for me, that if I just went outside, I'd find him waiting, annoyed that I'd taken so long. But the fence stayed empty. The scarf I'd given him never returned. Winter came. I grew thinner, quieter. The supervisors stopped yelling as much. I'd learned how to disappear, how to fold myself small, how to keep my eyes down, how to swallow disappointment before it reached my face. Hope was dangerous. I was learning that. One night, curled up on my narrow bed, I pressed my face into the thin pillow and let myself cry for the first time since he'd vanished. Not loud, never loud, just silent tears soaking into fabric as I clutched the memory of his hand around my wrist, his voice steady and sure when he'd made that impossible promise. "I'll marry you." It was stupid. I knew that now. People like him didn't come back for people like me. Alphas who escaped poverty didn't return to drag ghosts with them. They moved forward. They survived. They forgot. By the time spring came, I stopped going to the fence every night. I told myself it was because I was tired. Because there was no point anymore. Because I needed to live, not linger in a place that only reminded me of loss. But sometimes, on nights when the city was quiet and the air felt heavy, I still found myself whispering into the dark, "Are you rich yet?" There was never an answer, and slowly, painfully, I began to accept the truth. The promise was gone, and so was he. 10 years of waiting time did not heal me. It shaped me. The orphanage did not change, but I did, slowly, quietly, the way stone wears down under water. Days blurred into months, months into years, until I stopped counting entirely. Birthdays passed unnoticed. Seasons turned without ceremony. And somewhere along the way, the boy who waited by the fence every night learned how to stop hoping. I grew taller, thinner. My bones seemed to stretch faster than the rest of me could catch up. Hunger became familiar, no longer a sharp pain, but a dull, constant ache I carried everywhere, like an extra organ I hadn't asked for. By the time I turned 18, I was asked to leave. There was no farewell, no celebration. Just a folded piece of paper stating I was no longer the orphanage's responsibility, and a reminder that Omegas like me were expected to know our place in the world. I packed what little I owned into a small bag. Inside, it was a worn shirt, a cracked mirror, and the memory of an alpha who had once promised me a future. The city was not kind. I took whatever work I could find, cleaning kitchens after closing, sorting trash behind markets, mopping floors in places that smelled of oil and regret. The pay was barely enough to keep me fed, but it was better than sleeping on the street. At night, I shared cramped rooms with strangers who didn't bother learning my name. I learned to sleep light, to keep my back against the wall, to hide my Omega sense so well, even I sometimes forgot it was there. Suppressants became a necessity. I bought the cheapest ones I could find, patches that burned my skin and left me dizzy, but they worked. Mostly. I couldn't afford the attention that came with being an unclaimed Omega, not in a city that treated people like me as commodities. There were offers, some subtle, some not. An alpha once cornered me in an alley after work, eyes lingering too long, smile sharp with intent. I remembered Kale's hands, how careful they'd been, how he'd never crossed a line. I shoved past the alpha without looking back. "I'm not for sale," I said, voice shaking but firm. He laughed. Everyone did. I learned how to keep my head down, how to disappear into crowds, how to make myself small again, but this time by choice. Years passed like that. Sometimes, when I passed luxury buildings with dark windows and polished floors, I wondered if he was behind one of them, if he walked those halls now, dressed in expensive suits, powerful and untouchable, if he'd even recognize me. The thought hurt more than I liked to admit. I stopped asking questions that had no answers. stopped waiting for footsteps in the rain, stopped whispering into the dark. Or at least, I told myself I had. On the 10th anniversary of the night he disappeared, I found myself standing in front of the old orphanage. I hadn't planned to go there. My feet had simply carried me back, memory guiding me like a cruel instinct. The fence was still there, weathered and leaning, paint peeling away to reveal splintered wood beneath. The spot where KL had once rested was overgrown now. Grass and weeds claimed it like he'd never existed at all. I stood there for a long time, chest tight, hands buried deep in my pockets. "You said you'd come back," I murmured under my breath. Not accusing, just tired, the wind answered. I exhaled, something heavy loosening in my chest at last. That night, I made a decision. I would stop living in the past. I would stop measuring my worth against a promise made by a starving boy with nothing but hope to offer. If Cale came back, he'd find someone who no longer needed saving. And if he didn't, then I would survive anyway. I walked away from the fence without looking back. I didn't see the black car parked across the street. I didn't hear the man inside whisper my name like a prayer he'd spent 10 years memorizing. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that pressed against your ears and made your instincts stir. The street outside the orphanage was usually loud at this hour, filled with honking cars and distant voices. But that morning, everything felt held. Then I saw them. Black cars. Expensive, impossibly clean. They lined the cracked road like an invasion. Engines idling softly, windows tinted too dark to see inside. Men in tailored suits stood beside them, their posture sharp, eyes scanning the area with military precision. My stomach tightened. I took an instinctive step back, heart pounding. This wasn't my world anymore. It never had been. A few curious passers-by slowed, whispering among themselves. Even the street vendors nearby had gone quiet, watching with wary eyes. And then one of the car doors opened. A polished shoe touched the ground. I felt it before I saw him. The alpha pressure rolled through the air, thick and commanding, the kind that made lesser alphas straighten and omegas instinctively lower their gaze. It was overwhelming. Nothing like the broken boy who once leaned against a fence and accepted food from my shaking hands. This alpha was powerful, dangerous. My breath caught painfully in my chest. He stepped fully out of the car, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that fit him like it had been sewn onto his body. His hair was neatly styled now, his face sharp with maturity, but my heart slammed violently against my ribs. Those eyes, I knew them. I knew them the way you know a scar on your own skin, the way you know a dream you never quite forget. Cale. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed until it was just the two of us standing on opposite sides of the street. 10 years collapsed into nothing. Hunger, cold, waiting. It all surged back at once, so sharp it stole my breath. He didn't smile. He didn't hesitate. His gaze locked onto me with terrifying precision, like he'd never stopped looking. "There you are," he said softly. The sound of his voice, deeper now, smoother, threaded with command, sent a shiver down my spine. I took another step back. "I think you have the wrong person," I said. though my voice betrayed me shaking despite my effort to keep it steady. He crossed the street in long strides. The men behind him shifted, but didn't follow. They didn't need to. Whatever this was, it was personal. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that his presence wrapped around me, heavy and warm and overwhelming. "You got taller," he said, eyes scanning my face like he was committing it to memory all over again. Thinner. Anger flared suddenly, hot and unexpected. "You disappeared," I shot back before I could stop myself. "You don't get to say things like that." Something dark flickered in his eyes. Pain, regret. Something else. Something possessive. "I didn't disappear," he said quietly. "I was taken." The word hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. 10 years of imagined explanations rushed through my mind, each one dissolving under the weight of that single sentence. "I tried to come back," he continued, voice low. "But by the time I escaped, you were gone." A bitter laugh tore out of me. "So we're even then." His jaw tightened. "I looked for you," he said. "Everywhere." I shook my head. "You didn't look hard enough." The silence stretched between us, thick with everything unsaid. His gaze dropped briefly to my neck, where the edge of a suppressant patch peeked from beneath my collar. Something in him snapped. "Who's claiming you?" he demanded. "No one," I said sharply, "and it's none of your business." His alpha presence surged, controlled but unmistakable. "It became my business the moment I promised to marry you." My heart stuttered. "You don't get to hold me to a promise you broke," I whispered. He stepped closer. "I didn't break it," he said. "I survived for it. For a terrifying moment, I saw it. The boy he'd been, the hunger, the desperation, the fire that had kept him alive when everything else tried to crush him." "I'm rich now," he said, not bragging, just stating a fact. Powerful, untouchable. I met his gaze, refusing to look away. "Good for you." His hand lifted, stopping just short of touching my face. "I came back for you," he said softly, "and I'm not leaving without you." My chest ached. "So what?" I asked. "You think you can just pick me up where you left me? Like nothing happened?" His eyes darkened. "No," he said. "I think you're coming with me because this city isn't safe for you, and because you're still mine." The word echoed in my head. Mine. I laughed, bitter, broken. "You don't own me." A slow smile curved his lips, dangerous and intimate, all at once. "Not yet," Cale said. Behind him, one of the men opened a car door. I should have run. Instead, my feet stayed rooted to the ground as fate finally caught up to the promise I'd tried so hard to forget. I didn't get into the car because I wanted to. I got in because every instinct I had was screaming that saying no to Cale, this Cale, would only make things worse. The interior smelled like leather and something unmistakably alpha. Clean. Expensive? Controlled. It wrapped around me the moment the door closed, sealing me inside a world I no longer belonged to. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, eyes fixed on the window. As the car pulled away, the orphanage disappeared from view, swallowed by the city, and with it, the last place that had ever felt even remotely familiar. Kale sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, but he didn't force contact. He watched me instead, gaze steady, unreadable. You didn't have to bring an entire entourage, I muttered. They're not here for show, he replied calmly. You were being watched. I turned sharply. By who? People who prey on unprotected omegas, he said. People who would have noticed you sooner or later. A chill slid down my spine. You've been monitoring me, I said. Yes. The admission was too easy, too honest. You don't get to watch my life from afar and then walk back in like you own it, I snapped. His jaw tightened. I didn't watch. I searched. I scoffed. Convenient wording. The car fell into silence again, thick and uncomfortable. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the streets blur by, heart racing with questions I wasn't ready to ask. We stopped in front of a building that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Tall iron gates slid open silently as we approached. Inside, the estate was vast, manicured grounds, modern architecture, security cameras positioned with deliberate care. I stared, stunned despite myself. So this is what you became, I said quietly. Kale followed my gaze. This is what I built. The car door opened. A man in a suit bowed slightly toward Kale, then glanced at me with open curiosity before schooling his expression into neutrality. This way, Kale said. Inside, the air was warm and scented faintly with cedar. Everything gleamed. Marble floors, high ceilings, soft lighting that made the space feel unreal, like a place meant to be admired, not lived in. I felt painfully out of place. Kale led me through the house until we reached a large bedroom. Tastefully furnished, simple, clearly prepared in advance. This will be yours, he said. I spun toward him. Mine? For now, he corrected. Until we figure out what you want. I laughed, sharp and humorless. You mean until you decide. Something dark flickered across his face. I didn't bring you here to cage you, he said. I brought you here because I promised you a life where you'd never have to count grains of rice again. The words hit too close. I crossed my arms, nails digging into my sleeves. You think money fixes everything? No, he said quietly. I think it fixes enough that you finally have the freedom to choose. Then, let me leave. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the alpha presence coiled tightly beneath his calm exterior. You can, he said, but you won't. I stared up at him, pulse racing. Is that a threat? It's an observation. I swallowed. Why now? I demanded. Why come back after 10 years and drag me into this life? His gaze softened, just a fraction. Because every time I thought about the future, he said, voice low, you were in it. And because everything I built meant nothing if I couldn't keep the promise that made me survive. My throat tightened. You left me, I whispered. I was taken, he repeated. Used, trained, bound to people who wanted to shape me into a weapon. His eyes darkened. I broke free the moment I could. And I was just supposed to wait? I asked bitterly. No, he said. You were supposed to live. I just hoped, selfishly, that you'd still be there when I came back. I looked away, blinking hard. Stay, he said quietly. Not as a command, as a request. At least until you decide what you want. I won't touch you. I won't force you. But I won't let you be unsafe again. Silence stretched between us. Against my better judgment, I nodded. Fine, I said. I'll stay. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. A faint, relieved smile touched his lips. I wouldn't dare, Cale said. But I'll earn it. As he turned to leave, I sank onto the edge of the bed, heart pounding. 10 years ago, he had promised me a future. Now, I was sitting in it, uncertain, angry, and painfully aware that some part of me had never stopped waiting for him at all. Living under the same roof as Cale was nothing like I had imagined. I had pictured a reunion filled with relief, perhaps a tentative smile, or even the bitter satisfaction of having proven myself without him. Instead, I was trapped in a mansion that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely, a kingdom where every corner, every shadow, every room reminded me that Cale had returned, grown stronger, more commanding, more alpha than I could have imagined. The first night, I was guided to my room, which was warm, clean, and unnervingly comfortable. But the walls felt like a cage. The bed looked soft, inviting, but I refused to lie down, sitting stiffly on the edge, staring at the floor as if it could swallow me whole. Then came the rules. You'll follow them, Cale said, standing just inside the doorway. Not because I'm your master, not because I claim you, but because this house has walls and traps that are designed to keep you safe, and I won't have you hurt. I crossed my arms. I don't need protection. I can take care of myself. He raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. You've done well for yourself, yes, but in this world, Omegas don't just survive. They get hunted. They get used. You would have ended up in someone else's cage long ago if I hadn't returned. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. His words, they carried weight. Not the weight of threat, but the weight of truth. So I said nothing. Days passed, and slowly the rhythm of forced proximity settled over us like a storm barely held at bay. Meals were served in silence. Walks through the estate were brief and calculated, and every time I entered a room, he was there, or, at least, I felt his presence before I saw him. I noticed the subtle things first, the way his gaze lingered a second too long on my hands as I poured tea, the way he hovered near doorways when he didn't need to, the soft click of his boots behind me when I moved through the hall. It wasn't threatening. Not yet. But it was a warning I couldn't ignore. One evening, I found myself in the library, trying to hide behind stacks of old books, pretending to read. Cale appeared quietly, leaning against the doorframe. You're avoiding me, he said softly. I'm not, I replied, voice flat. You are, he countered, stepping closer. His shadow fell over me, warm and suffocating. You think you can hide. You think that pretending you don't care will erase the years I've spent waiting to see you again. I don't need your waiting, I snapped. He raised a brow. Do you know why I came back? I said nothing. "Because you are mine," he said, low and steady. "And because I promised. That promise hasn't been broken. Not once. And it won't be." I flinched, not at the words, but at the possessiveness underlying them. His eyes were dark, stormy, and all-consuming. Alpha eyes that had once seemed soft and desperate, now sharp and certain. "I'm not a child anymore," I muttered. "You never were," he said. "But you are still an Omega. And Omegas belong to someone who will protect them. I am that person, whether you like it or not." I swallowed, tight in the chest, trying to push away the fluttering heat that his words ignited. It was impossible. Over the next week, the pattern solidified. Cale would appear just when I thought I was alone. His presence was magnetic, drawing me into a tension I couldn't explain or resist. He never touched me unnecessarily, at least, not yet, but his closeness, the subtle brush of his hand when passing, the way he lingered near me during meals, drove me crazy. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The faint scent of cedar and smoke that clung to him, the way his gaze softened only when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his jaw tightened if anyone else dared to glance at me. Possessive, protective, obsessive, and I hated it. But I hated it less than I wanted him. The night I realized just how much the proximity affected me, he cornered me in the study. The door clicked shut behind him, locking with a soft thunk. I tried to step back, but the walls pressed me forward. The table between us, no barrier at all. "You're mine," he whispered, voice low, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I shook my head violently, chest heaving. "No, you don't get to do this. After all these years, like it's some kind of right." He didn't flinch, didn't budge, only stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "You think I don't know what you feel?" he asked. Every glance, every step away from me, every attempt to hide, it tells me everything. You're terrified. You're angry. And you're drawn to me anyway. I opened my mouth to speak, but words failed me. He had always known me better than anyone else. Even now, even after 10 years. His finger lifted, brushing lightly against my jaw, sending a shiver down my spine. "You can resist," he said softly, "but I will wait. And I will make you see what's always been yours." And in that moment, I hated him, and I wanted him, and I was terrified of what this forced proximity was doing to me. I couldn't escape. Not from him, not from the storm building between us. I knew something was wrong the moment I woke up shaking. My skin burned beneath the sheets, every nerve ending hypersensitive, my breath coming in shallow gasps that did nothing to cool the fire spreading through my body. The suppressant patch on my neck felt useless, an irritant instead of a solution. Heat, I hadn't had one in years. I sat up abruptly, panic clawing its way up my chest. This wasn't some cramped apartment where I could lock myself in a bathroom and wait it out. This was Cale's house. Cale's territory. Cale, who was an alpha. My scent betrayed me before I could think. Sweet, thick, unmistakable Omega heat flooded the room, curling into the air like a confession I hadn't meant to make. I scrambled out of bed, fingers fumbling as I tried to pull on clothes, desperate to cover myself, to hide what my body was announcing without my consent. The door opened. I didn't hear his footsteps. I only felt him. Kale froze just inside the doorway, eyes snapping to me, then darkening instantly. His alpha presence surged, but then, just as quickly, it locked down, controlled with brutal discipline. He inhaled sharply. Oh, he breathed, not in hunger, in alarm. "Get out," I said hoarsely, backing away. "Please, just go." He shut the door behind him with deliberate care, locking it. My heart lurched. "Kale, I'm not leaving you alone like this," he said firmly. "Not again." The words hit harder than the heat ever could. I sagged against the bed, knees giving out, sweat beating at my temples. "You shouldn't be here. This is dangerous. For you," he said, moving closer, but stopping several feet away. "Not for me." I laughed weakly. "You're an alpha." "Yes," he said, "which is exactly why I won't touch you." That finally made me look up. He was rigid with restraint, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His hands were fisted at his sides, knuckles white, like he was holding himself together through sheer force of will. "I've wanted you for 10 years, Kale said quietly. "Do you really think I don't feel this?" My throat tightened painfully. "Then leave," I whispered. "If you care at all, leave." "I can't," he said, "but I can endure." He moved then, not toward me, but to the far side of the room, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, putting distance between us on purpose. "I'll stay here," he said. "I'll talk to you. I'll keep you grounded. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you get through this safely." Tears blurred my vision. "You don't owe me that," I said. "I owe you everything." The heat worsened in waves, dizzying, overwhelming. Kale spoke to me the entire time, steady and calm, anchoring me when my thoughts scattered. He told me about the places he'd traveled, the battles he'd survived, the nights he'd thought he'd die without ever seeing me again. "I remembered your voice," he said softly, "every time I was close to breaking. At one point, I reached for him without realizing it, fingers trembling in the space between us. He froze. "Tell me to stop," he said, voice rough. I couldn't. So he didn't move closer. Instead, he reached out just enough to let our fingertips brush, nothing more. The contact grounded me. Hours passed like that. Pain. Heat. Confessions whispered into the dark. Kale never once crossed the line. Never once let instinct override respect. When the worst finally passed, exhaustion dragged me under. The last thing I felt before sleep claimed me was warmth. His coat draped carefully over me, and the weight of his presence as he stayed awake beside the bed, guarding, waiting, keeping the promise he'd never broken. I woke up to quiet. Not the fragile, uncertain quiet of early morning, but the deliberate kind, the kind that meant someone had been watching over me all night. My body still felt heavy, drained from the heat, but the fire was gone. In its place was a dull soreness and an unfamiliar sense of safety. I shifted slightly and felt fabric slide against my skin. KL's coat. I inhaled before I could stop myself. Cedar and smoke. Him. I sat up slowly, heart thudding. and found him standing near the window, phone pressed to his ear, posture rigid. His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "No," he said, "you don't touch him." A pause. "I don't care what you were promised." Another pause, longer this time. Then, cold and final. "If you come near him again, I'll burn your entire operation to the ground." He ended the call and turned. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You should be resting," he said finally, voice gentler now. "How do you feel?" "Better," I replied. "What was that about?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away, and that alone told me everything. "Someone knows about me," I said quietly. "Yes," he admitted. "They noticed your scent spike. Omegas in heat don't go unnoticed in my world." Fear curled low in my stomach. And they thought you were leverage." I swung my legs off the bed despite the lingering weakness. "Kale." He was beside me instantly, hands hovering but not touching. "You're safe. No one will ever touch you without your consent." "That didn't sound like a request," I said. "It wasn't." He guided me to sit back down, finally placing a hand on my shoulder. Warm, steady, grounding. "They wanted me to hand you over," he continued, eyes dark, "as proof of loyalty, as a symbol." My breath caught. "And what did you say?" His gaze softened, fierce and unwavering. I said no. A simple word. Absolute. "You understand what that means?" he asked. Turning them down puts a target on my back, on my business, on everything I've built. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the boy he'd once been layered beneath the powerful alpha he'd become. "You chose me," I whispered. "I chose you 10 years ago," he replied. "The rest was just survival." The estate shifted after that. Security doubled. Routes changed. Kale moved with lethal awareness, never letting me out of his sight for long. If someone else entered the room, his body angled subtly in front of mine, without conscious thought, possessive, protective, unapologetic, and still he never crossed my boundaries. One evening, I found him in the training room, blood blooming slowly through the sleeve of his shirt. I rushed forward before he could stop me. "What happened?" I demanded. "Negotiations," he said lightly. I grabbed a first aid kit with shaking hands. "You promised not to fight for me." He met my eyes. "I promised not to make you fight." The distinction shattered something in my chest. As I bandaged his arm, my fingers brushed his skin. He sucked in a sharp breath, but stayed still. "You could lose everything," I said quietly. He tilted his head. "I already lived with nothing." My hands paused. "And you?" he asked. "What do you want?" The question startled me. I hesitated, the truth pressing against my ribs. "I want to believe you won't leave again." His expression changed, softened into something painfully sincere. "I'm done running," Kale said. "If they want a war, they'll have it. But I won't trade you for peace." Something inside me finally gave way. I rested my forehead briefly against his chest, just for a second, just long enough to feel his heart pounding beneath my skin. He didn't move, didn't touch me, just let me choose. And in that moment, I knew the Alpha who once begged for a bowl of rice was gone. In his place stood a man who would burn the world before letting anyone take me again. The city whispered after that. I felt it in the way people looked at me when I walked beside Kale, in the sudden politeness, in the careful distance others kept. Word traveled fast in his world, and the message was clear. The Omega at his side was untouchable, not owned, not offered, chosen. Still, Kale didn't rush me. Days passed, then weeks. Life inside the estate settled into something almost gentle. Mornings where we shared quiet breakfasts. Afternoons where I read in the garden while he worked nearby, always within sight. Evenings filled with conversations that stretched long into the night. He never pressed, never assumed, and that made everything harder. One evening, he asked me to walk with him. We left the estate just before sunset, the city bathed in gold and shadow. He led me to a high terrace overlooking the skyline, a place so quiet it felt suspended outside time. I used to come here when things got heavy, he said. It reminded me why I was fighting. I folded my arms against the cool breeze. And now? He turned to face me. Now I want to remember what I fought for. My heart thudded painfully. I'm not the same person, I said softly. Waiting changed me. I know, he replied. So did losing you. He took a breath, steadying himself, then did something I never expected. Kale lowered himself onto one knee. The world seemed to stop. I promised you marriage when I had nothing, he said, looking up at me, eyes unguarded and raw. That promise wasn't fair. I was desperate. I didn't know what it would cost you to believe me. My hands trembled. So I'm not asking you to honor that promise, he continued. I'm asking you to decide now, with everything laid bare. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple ring. No excess, no show, just meaning. I don't want to be your savior, Kale said. I want to be your partner. If you walk away today, I'll accept it. But if you stay, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you. Tears blurred my vision. 10 years ago, I had believed a promise because I was hungry. Now, I stood here full of pain, of growth, of self-worth. I took a slow breath. Stand up, I said. Hope flickered across his face as he rose. I waited for you for a long time, I said quietly, and I hated myself for it. But somewhere along the way, I learned something important. He listened like my words were law. I don't want you because you're rich, I continued, or powerful. I want you because you came back and because you never tried to take what wasn't freely given. I reached out and placed my hand over his heart. So, yes, I said, voice steady despite the tears. I choose you, not because of a promise, but because you kept it. His breath broke. He pulled me into his arms, not claiming, not dominating, just holding me like something precious and irreplaceable. I won't fail you again, he whispered into my hair. For the first time in 10 years, I believed him without fear. The wedding was nothing like I had imagined as a boy. There were no crowds pressing in, no spectacle meant to impress the world. Kale made sure of that. What he wanted was simple, honest, ours. The ceremony took place in the garden of the estate, beneath a wide sky painted soft blue and gold. White flowers lined the path, their scent gentle, not overwhelming. The air felt calm, almost reverent, as if the world itself knew this moment mattered. I stood at the end of the aisle, hands trembling slightly, heart steady for the first time in years. When Cale appeared, dressed in dark formal wear that fit him perfectly, every breath left my lungs. This alpha, the one people feared, respected, whispered about, looked at me like I was the only thing in existence. Not possession, not obligation. Choice. As I walked toward him, memories flooded me. A fence in the rain, a bowl of rice, a promise whispered by a starving boy with fire in his eyes. He reached for my hands, warm and sure, grounding me. I once promised you a future when I had nothing, he said softly, voice carrying just enough for me to hear. Today, I give you one freely, with everything I am. When the vows were spoken, there were no grand speeches, no declarations of dominance, just truth. I choose you, I said, meeting his gaze, not because you saved me, but because you never stopped respecting me. The bond settled between us, quietly, deeply, like something that had always been waiting to come home. Later, as evening fell and lights flickered softly around the garden, I found myself leaning against Cale's side, watching the city glow in the distance. "Are you happy?" he asked, thumb brushing gently over my knuckles. I thought about the boy I'd been, the one who had learned to survive by shrinking, by waiting, by believing in promises because he had nothing else. "I'm safe," I said, "and I'm loved." "I think that's better than happy," he smiled then. Not the alpha who ruled, not the man the world feared, but Cale, the boy who once needed a bowl of rice to survive. "You're never waiting again," he said quietly. "From now on, we move forward together." That night, as I lay beside him, warmth and steady breathing anchoring me, I understood something with perfect clarity. He hadn't come back rich just to fulfill a promise. He had come back ready to love without taking, ready to protect without owning, ready to stay. And for the first time in my life, I slept without fear of being left behind.